See, corruption is a human nature. It's a natural element. The question now is, how do we curb the impact of corruption on the economic and social development of our countries? Many of these manifestations, particularly in the public, are simply symptoms of a deeper problem. And what we as the Economic, Social and Cultural Council are mandated to do is to address the core problem and to make sure that it's not only just focused on relieving the symptom, but also dealing with the issues that are stemming from it. Now, in terms of implementing, it is not up to the African Union Secretariat alone to implement this. It is up to governments, it is up to civil society, and it is up to the ordinary citizen. It starts with one. And if one person can decide that indeed they're going to make the effort to find the open door, because indeed there is an open door within the African Union for integration of this, the ear and the mouth of the citizen to be part of development. If one person can do it, before you know it, that one person who's made that decision is everyone in the continent, and that's where you then have the people-centered and people-driven African Union development.
Are we behind schedule, or you think we still need to do a lot of work to catch up?
We need to be a bit more patient with ourselves. You know, Africa is a very young continent if you look at civilizations across the world. And the microscope that is on African development is so zoomed in that it becomes difficult for the natural development and evolution of our continent to actually live out to its natural selection.
Almost everyone in Ethiopia has a relationship with injera. If you travel to East Africa, it is ugali. In West Africa, gari or fufu. Go to Uganda, they talk about matoke. In North Africa, they eat couscous. These are everyday staple foods that are part of our African lives and culture. At the African Passport Show, we want our people to build the same special, sacred, and familiar relationship with the vision and aspirations of Agenda 2063, as pursued by the African Union. I'm your host, Godfrey Misiji Madanire, and today we have a very special guest from an advisory body of the African Union known as the Economic, Social and Cultural Council, Mr. Patson Malisa, who is the Deputy Presiding Officer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, sir, and thank you to the viewers for having me.
Now, I know a lot of people might not know, might not be familiar with what you do as an organization. So it's only fair that I begin the show by asking you a very simple question. What is the role of the Economic, Social and Cultural Council?
Well, the Economic, Social and Cultural Council was established by Article 5 and 22 of the Constitutive Act of the African Union, in which they called for an advisory board to be established, which will look into the policies as well as the resolutions and decisions of the African Union, both in their drafting as well as their implementation and evaluation. So the Economic, Social and Cultural Council serves as that advisory body, and in its work, it is mandated to bring out the voices of both state and non-state actors to the realities on the ground, and hence the representation within the council is in all 54 and 55 member states of the African Union, as well as making sure that there is a blueprint on the regional and continental frameworks to make sure that indeed, as resolutions and decisions are passed from heads of state and the executive council, there is a proper chain of implementation as well as collaboration between both the citizen as well as the governments in implementing the primary decisions of the African Union, and particular focus with Agenda 2063.
Now, if I heard you correctly, maybe it will only be fair for me to then ask what you are doing to get the civil society organizations involved in the work of the African Union.
Well, ECOSOCC is established, or it is intended to be established in all 55 member states. So in other words, there's meant to be representation from all 55 member states in the form of civil society organizations. Now, the beauty of ECOSOCC is that These are not organizations that are referred to by government or by politicians, but they're actual civil society organizations that have proven that they've got work going on the ground, as well as within their respective countries and regions, to ensure that indeed when they come and speak on the continental stage, they're speaking from a place of experience and from proper reading of the pulse in terms of African development. So that is one. And number two, we're making sure that the executive in the form of the Bureau, as well as the Standing Committee, is in consistent collaboration with civil society organizations, as well as member states, in ensuring that programs of the African Union are being implemented duly, as well as being integrated into the national development plans. And successes thereof are seen in countries like Nigeria, where there's a permanent working relationship between the federal government and state governments with the national chapter there. Here within the Southern African region, where I am from, you'll find that there are countries such as the Republic of Zimbabwe, the Republic of Mozambique, as well as the Kingdom of Eswatini, where the government policies have integrated the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council into making things happen in terms of the national policy frameworks.
Now, just a few weeks ago, we hosted Professor Lumumba on the show, and he said something very interesting. He said about 2 to 3 people out of 10 know or have an idea of what the African Union does. Now, I'll follow up and say, indeed, some people argue that the African Union is very foreign to ordinary people on the ground. What is your response to that?
It's really a matter of perception. At the end of the day, if you go deep down into finding out exactly where the African Union is positioned, not only from the matter of the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council, but in terms of the integrated development planning of member states, you'll find that it is difficult to put a finger on the pulse and not see a footprint of what the African Union has in terms of decisions across the board. Now, in terms of the praise, or should we say the credit going to the African Union, of course, that will be usually limited because of the fact that, you know, you're dealing in a political arena and governments need to be in touch with their constituencies. But in terms of the directions in which member states take their policies, as well as integrating the work of the African Union from a continental perspective, to putting it down to progressive political will, as well as economic and social policy, you'll find the footprint of the African Union in the progressive development, particularly over the past 20 years of its existence.
Now, how are you contributing to the promotion of human rights, the rule of law, good governance, democratic principles, gender equality, and children's rights? I know you're passionate when it comes to gender equality and children's rights.
Most definitely. The African Union has got a very expressive framework, particularly with regards to the promotion of human rights, as well as good governance and policy development. These are seen in the African Charter for Democracy, Elections, and Governance, as well as the African Charter for Human and People's Rights. Now, these charters are particularly based on making sure that governments enact proper integration of stakeholder engagement, proper administration, good contingency plans in the process, or within the eventuality that some of the systems are found to be non-conducive, or if, for example, there's a coup, or if there is indeed a civil war, there are contingencies in place that make integration or intervention for the African Union, as well as regional bodies, to be part of the rehabilitation and the restoration of order, as well as good governance at the end of the day. And in cases where the matters are still in early warning stages, you'll find organs such as the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, as well as the African Union Development Agency, known across the continent as NEPAD, who come up with policy and advisory reports which serve as pre-warnings in the sense of economic downturns or within the sense of political instability or the violation of human rights. And we have quite a bit of a good working relationship from ECOSOCC with these particular bodies in ensuring that that voice is not only echoed at policy levels, but also at a civil society perspective, so that it's not only just a political will, but it's also citizen will that is also mobilized to make sure that human rights as well as good governance is promoted within the continent.
Talking about these interventions, I know we are in 2020, and part of the Agenda 2063 says, we should silence the guns by the year 2020. We have seen innocent civilians being shot and killed in Mozambique, shamelessly, I must add. What are you doing to intervene?
Well, Mozambique is actually a central focus of the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council. In fact, in the Southern African region, the primary chapter that is responsible for our peace policy development is the Republic of Mozambique. So we work extensively and particularly with their Ministry of International Relations, their Ministry for Justice, which also goes deeper into religious affairs as well as civil society affairs. So we make sure that indeed, when issues like this rise up, we not only go behind the scenes and work extensively with government to curb the problems and highlight where the real issues are, because many of these manifestations, particularly in the public, are simply symptoms of a deeper problem. And what we as the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council are mandated to do is to address the core problem and to make sure that it's not only just focused on relieving the symptom, but also dealing with the issues that are stemming from it. With example, the fact that terrorism is being inspired by economic challenges within the country, as well as the fact that there's been opposition, there's been a rift between the main opposition and the ruling party for quite some time. In fact, towards the end of the reconciliation process, ECOSOCC was the first organ of the African Union to actually go into Mozambique and participate in that peace and reconciliation process, to a point that the eventual peace treaty made sure that there is a regular consultation between the state as well as non-state actors in making sure that the peace process is integrated throughout from the top right to the bottom.
Now, talking about ECOSOCC, I know you have various committees, and the African Union has various commission or technical departments, like your peace and security, your political affairs. How do you ensure that these various committees work in harmony with the different commissions of the African Union, and there is no duplication of roles, as it were?
See, the beauty of our work is that serving as an advisory board or as an advisory body, you cannot impose advice. So you need to have your finger on the pulse in terms of what is the demand. And usually the demand is placed on the African Union theme of the year, as well as Agenda 2063 with its programs with 10-year implementation plans, as well as the various frameworks for the different organs of the African Union. So what we then do is, in our year planning, we ensure that we have got that plan or the overall African Union plan within the focus and center stage of what we do. And then we integrate that into the work of the different commissions and departments of the African Union Commission, as well as invite other African Union organs to then share their perspectives on the relevant topics for that year, and ensure that indeed it is harmonious when we then give our advice and we give our recommendations to member states through the Executive Council as well as the Permanent Representative Council. We have actually had an extensive work the previous year in building up to what it is that we then submit to the heads of state.
2020 has been a very different year. In April, ECOSOCC issued out a statement calling out national chapters to join the fight against COVID-19. How was the response on the ground?
See, the problem with the COVID-19 process is that it has shrunk significantly the resource mobilization capabilities of not only people on the ground, but also governments to the point that even membership dues of the African Union are not necessarily being met. And it's not only just the African Union, but it's all multilaterals as a whole, because of the fact that most countries are in a state of emergency, and it's mostly emergency funds now that have been reserved. So we as the African Unions as a whole have chosen that we use an austerity measure within ourselves as a body, and also among civil society, to bootstrap where necessary, to ensure that indeed programs can still continue from both working online, as well as making sure that the national chapters themselves have continuous dialogue on the ground. So instead of having the extensive consultations that would usually have from a person-to-person perspective, we're making use of new technologies, making use of new innovations to ensure that people on the ground can still have their voice heard. And in some places where the remote reality of villages and remote areas still make it difficult to have technology as a primary base of information dissemination, you still have that interaction between one-on-one basis based on the regulations of the particular country, based on, of course, also the limits on how many can convene and so on. But the consultations and the engagement of people on the ground remains intact, in terms of making sure that we're not just researching on Google and then saying, as this report said, this is what the African Union ECOSOCC says. We're still giving a first-hand report as to what is really going on the ground.
Still talking about the COVID-19 pandemic, we know the effects of COVID-19 delayed the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which was scheduled to be launched on the 1st of July 2020. How does your structure intend adding value as you work with Mr. Wamkele Mene, the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat?
Well, that particular area is meant to be addressed by two clusters within our organ. The first one being the trade and industry cluster, as well as the economic affairs clusters. Now, both of them have established frameworks from which they are to engage the office of Mr. Wamkele and make sure that indeed, as their office is getting off the ground and they're about to integrate, they have first-hand knowledge and first-hand research available for them, in terms of making sure that when they address member states and they consult with them, there is indeed real-time information. And that's the role of ECOSOCC at the end of the day, is to ensure that there is always real-time information, as well as invoking the goodwill of governments and the people of the African Union in implementing African Union programs.
And for some people, they say in Africa there is a culture of corruption, or some they would call it nepotism. And I don't think that's what ECOSOCC would want to hear. What are you doing to make sure we get rid of such a culture, if there's anything like that?
You see, corruption is a human nature. You see it with your children. When you have two boys or two girls, and you give them one chocolate and you put it on the table and say, no one should eat this, one of two things can happen. Either one of them decides he or she's going to have it for themselves, or they're going to share it amongst each other and they're just going to keep quiet and say, look, we don't know what happened. So it's a natural element. The question now is, how do we curb the impact of corruption on the economic and social development of our countries? And that has been the main issue within the African continent, where the corruption actually is an impediment to the social and economic development of the countries, because service delivery is basically diminished to a very significant level, and people are not getting their lives bettered because of that. So we at ECOSOCC are encouraging amongst member states the benefit of having a a productive and prosperous society. You know, at the end of the day, we're looking for a peaceful and prosperous African Union. And in doing that, it becomes a lot more easier and a lot more fruitful for any policymaker or any person in private sector to reap better benefits without having to steal underhandedly. Because when there's much more resources, there's much more incentive, there's much more reason for people to be rewarded for just labor. But when there's scarcity in resources, and this being implemented and being exacerbated by corruption, it becomes a lot more difficult for people to find motivation for them to do a good job. And therefore, it is within the spirit of good service delivery based on the charters and the protocols that member states have agreed to, that we say the reward in doing good is a lot more better than the reward in simply being underhanded and carrying on the culture of the child who only sees the one chocolate. Rather, let's create more chocolates, make it easier for everyone to benefit, and let it be done on a legal space. And other organs who are supporting this are the African Advisory Board on Corruption, as well as other elements within the Commission of the African Union. And I think this is a good trajectory. It's a long road still, but at least in implementing that principle of saying there's a lot more good in doing good than in simply creating the appearance of doing good. That's a very important factor in African development today.
Yes, I know there is the sixth region of the African Union, which is the diaspora community, and I know you have a relationship with the Citizens and Diaspora Directorate. How are you working with them to make sure they achieve their goals?
In fact, the Citizen and Diaspora Organization has worked as a parent secretariat for the African Union Economic, Social, and Cultural Council since its inception. So we have actually integrated our programs in terms of not only working within the continent, but also in the diaspora. And to the effect that most, if not all of our work with the diaspora is actually headed by the Citizens and Diaspora Organization. And we simply facilitate the technical and advisory framework that then makes their job a lot more easier and a lot more effective. And we're working together with them to actually define the framework of the working relationship between the African Union as well as the diaspora network, as per the Executive Council decision that was passed a few years ago, mandating both CEDAW as well as ECOSOCC in managing this particular endeavor.
All right. Now, looking at the 7 aspirations of Agenda 2063 as a whole. Now, as ECOSOCC, when you look at how we're performing, are you happy? Do you think we're on track? Are we behind schedule? Or you think we still need to do a lot of work to catch up?
I think particularly in the elements of creating a secure and prosperous Africa, I think this is an element that is going to take some time. And we need to be a bit more patient with ourselves. You know, Africa is a very young continent if you look at civilizations across the world. And the microscope that is on African development is so zoomed in that it becomes difficult for the natural development and evolution of our continent to actually live out to its natural selection, as other continents had without the impediment of media as well as a close eye. If you really read into the history of Europe as well as the Americas, going back to the Inquisitions, to the fights with the Knights and the Crusades, going into the Inquisitions, and then going even further as early as the 1900s, the early 1900s, with the First World War and Second World War and the Cold War. If you're to look at that and then put into perspective how the African continent has fared within the past 56 years, we have come a long way in a very short time, because we've had the added pressure of our narrative also being defined by a world that is looking towards the continent to catch up with continents that have had hundreds of years of independent development, whereas we have not yet even reached 100 years of full independence yet. And so Agenda 2063 has got both the blessing and the curse of high expectations, but at the same time, unrealistic expectations, because as humans, we also need to go through certain evolutions of which are natural to the selection of any civilization. And we need to be able to understand that and allow ourselves that reality to set in. I will put in a biblical reference to this with Moses. Moses' generation was the one that liberated the children of Israel, but it was not the one who went into the promised land. They all had to die off, and there had to be a Joshua generation. And even that generation was not the one to set up the kingdom of within Jerusalem. It took furthermore with the judges and going all the way up to the prophet Samuel, and then Saul, and then David. So as a result, our generation is mandated with both managing the expectations as well as the reality of nature. And I think as a result of that, we need to be a bit more focused and a lot more pragmatic in how we handle policy within the continent.
Now, Mr. Patson Malisa, finally, as the Deputy Presiding Officer of ECOSOCC, there is a lot of people, I can tell you, I can assure you, that are in North Africa, Southern Africa, East Africa, Central Africa, and they want to participate in the activities of the African Union. Now, how can they be part of such activities, and can you assure them that they've got a role to play?
Most definitely. In fact, we have an aspiration 6 of the African Union Agenda 2063, a people-centered and people-driven development. And so as a result, we have within the mandate of ECOSOCC, as well as the Citizens and Diaspora Organization, the mandate to ensure that this is indeed possible. So if you go and you log on to our Facebook page, there is regular updates of the regular happenings within the African Union, the calls for proposals, the calls for human resource, the calls for participation in meetings and in dialogues that shape the trajectory of where the African Union is going. And I encourage people to log on to that. If they want to look at the main websites, there's the African Union Commission website, which is www.au.int, or you can go onto our website, which is www.auecosoc.org, and there's regular updates as to where we are, what we're doing, and how best we can be integrated. And of course, there is technocracies, there's bureaucracy, but within all of that, there is the will and the passion within particularly the young Africans who have taken on executive roles. In fact, in ECOSOCC, our head of secretariat is a young person. And even in ECOSOCC itself, the governing body, I was 24 when I was first elected as Deputy Presiding Officer. And now we've got at least 2 other young people serving within the standing committee as well later on. So we have got a new nature. We are putting in that, forgive me again for going back to that Bible, but that Joshua element towards African development that calls on a more reformative and a lot more vigorous integration of the continent's people, particularly its youth.
And now, can you assure us that whatever people will bring in as suggestions will definitely be implemented? Because there's also a belief that African Union is sometimes a talk shop, and things don't get to be implemented, but we just get to hear about these beautiful speeches and it ends there.
See, the African Union is a multilateral organization. So its first mandate is to ensure that people talk. And in talking and exhausting the topics, they can allow for an integrated and a better understanding of one another's plights. Now, in terms of implementing, it is not up to the African Union Secretariat alone to implement this. It is up to governments, it is up to civil society, and it is up to the ordinary citizen to make the effort to join within the efforts of the African Union. Yes, our infrastructure is still not as effective as it should be because we're servicing 55 member states, and many of them not having the necessary infrastructure to have real-time consultation and development implementation. But it starts with one. And if one person can decide that indeed they're going to make the effort to find the open door, because indeed there is an open door within the African Union for integration of this, the ear and the mouth of the citizen to be part of development. If one person can do it, before you know it, that one person who's made that decision is everyone in the continent, and that's where you then have the people-centered and people-driven African Union development. And it is up to us as the African Union to make sure that once that one person comes forward, that we are open, we have a spirit of reform, we have a spirit of integration of these particular views in making sure that there's a balanced effort in making sure that the African Union is indeed going positively towards its aims of Agenda 2063.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patson Malisa, for being available. I can assure you that the African Passport Show will always be a bridge, a stage, and a platform for you to connect with people on the ground so that they get to understand the good work that you are doing for the African Union through ECOSOCC. One of the founding fathers of the African Union, Kwame Nkrumah, said, "Unite we must, without necessarily sacrificing our sovereignties. We can forge a political union based on defense, foreign affairs, and diplomacy, and a common citizenship, an African currency, a monetary zone, and a central bank. We must unite in order to achieve the full liberation of our continent." For me, the key word here is unity, unity, and unity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for watching. Tune in next week, same time, same place, but remember to like, share, and subscribe. Do not miss the next episode of the African Passport Show as we publicize and promote the vision and aspirations of Agenda 2063. Let us work towards the Africa we want.